Hi everyone. I recently hosted a workshop at Norwalk Community College on using writing to learn activities to engage students and promote critical thinking. The workshop was well attended and news spread pretty fast. I had several colleagues reach out to me to say, "Hey, did you record that session? I would have loved to attend, but I had class or another commitment." Well, I didn't record it, but I'm turning it into a short video today so that you can learn about these activities and adopt them for your courses. Let's get started. Before we jump into the activities, let's discuss what writing across the curriculum areas exist or are generally presented as options for faculty who want to use more writing in their courses. There's writing to learn, which our presentation will go over today. There's writing to engage, and then there's writing in the disciplines. Writing to engage and writing in the disciplines, these types of assignments will probably be a more significant portion of students' grades. So a writing to engage activity in my course, an English course, would be a synthesis paper, where I ask students to read articles that present multiple perspectives on a topic, and then to synthesize that information, to find similarities and differences in perspectives, and to connect that knowledge with the student's own prior knowledge of the topic. A writing in the disciplines activity is more about helping students learn to write rhetorically for their discipline-specific genres and audiences. So they're really learning to think and write and use the language of the discipline they are studying. Writing to learn activities are much more informal, short, low-stakes activities. They're writing activities that promote learning, but they are not a test of that learning. So as the faculty member, we are not a judge in any way. We use these activities more to facilitate students' own thinking about key concepts and the different material presented in class. So these types of activities might take, I don't know, just 5 minutes of time in class, or they could be brief out of class activities as well. So in this video, we're going to explore some low stakes engaging activities. I actually have 6 writing to learn activities. I'll describe the activity, give an example, and then hopefully you'll pause the video and consider how you would use or adapt this activity for your course. So the first activity is what we call a bio poem. This activity actually comes from an excellent book I'm reading right now called Engaging Ideas, The Professor's Guide to Integrating Writing, Critical Thinking, and Active Learning in the Classroom. This book I'm finding is an excellent resource for faculty in any discipline with ideas on how to use writing to learn, writing to engage, and writing in the discipline. So I highly recommend if you're able to purchase a copy or borrow a copy from your college's library. In my workshop, I use this activity as an introduction activity before participants even realized I was going over a writing to learn activity. The book I just mentioned provides the example on the right side on the Grand Inquisitor. So this is an example, and then the instructions I've adapted on the left side to show how you could use a bio poem in your own course. And so this poem happens to be 11 lines. You could modify it to be shorter or longer if you want, and it tells your writer how to fill in the prompt. So at the end, students end up with an 11-line poem that they've used to explore some kind of concept, and it might even bring up questions about a concept or something they're studying in class too. So here's the purpose of this activity. It uses a formulaic structure for the student writer to create a poem on something they see as significant or maybe studying some kind of meaningful dimensions of a subject's life. You could use a bio poem like I did in the workshop to build community between participants or students, or you could use it to help students see those personal dimensions of an important figure studied in the course. Here are some examples. You could have students write bio poems on Plato, Galileo, Frankenstein's monster. A participant in my workshop really liked the idea of having his nursing students write a bio poem for an elderly person in a nursing home or someone with a disease. And he commented that he thought this could really help students learn or recognize empathy as future nurses. So this could be adapted in many ways. Another participant who teaches environmental science, she said, "Hey, I don't think this has to be about a person. I think it could even be done on a tree species. And I thought that was really cool because I hadn't considered necessarily how it would be adapted for some type of science class. So there are lots of ways to adapt this activity, and it's fun and creative and a great way to engage students. The next game is the believing and doubting game. My English scholar or English professor colleagues might recognize this because it was first promoted by another English scholar, Peter Elbow. But again, it can be adapted for any course, and it helps students become more adept at understanding the complexity of issues and arguments. So what you have students do is first write in support of an idea or concept, then students write in opposition to it. I really love to use this in my English courses, particularly with an article I have students read called The Busy Trap, which was published in the New York Times. In this article, the author is basically arguing that our lives are so consumed by busyness, it's become almost a boast, something that we brag about. Oh, I'm so busy. Look at me. I'm so busy. I must be so important. And he says we brag about it or we keep ourselves busy as a way to avoid some kind of emptiness we might feel without it. And ultimately, he suggests that we should all reduce the amount of busyness in our lives and adopt more idleness. Students typically have a lot to say, whether that's realistic for everyone to do or not. So this activity helps students start to explore what the strengths of the author's argument are, and also maybe what the weaknesses are or where additional evidence is needed. This could be easily modified for any course by the prompts below, or maybe one you develop yourself, where you have students say, I fully support this viewpoint, or don't because this is the best concept, or the best article I've read, or it's the worst because this concept definitely applies to my life, or it doesn't because. And this could be used in any type of course where you're maybe have some kind of controversial issues or topics. For example, a participant in my workshop who teaches in the veterinary tech program at Norwalk said this could be great for those controversial issues like animals, cats in particular, should be declawed or should not be declawed. And it can kind of help students see issues not so much as cut and dry, black and white, but as having plenty of conversation between the yes and the no viewpoints. The third activity is the stop, drop, and write activity. This one's fun. It helps students process information in small chunks and remain engaged in the lesson, especially if this particular lesson is a content-heavy or lecture-heavy lesson. It can be used at any point in the semester, and it might even help refocus a lagging discussion. Students like this because they get to yell out at their instructor to stop. So you request a timekeeper and you have a student maybe every 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever chunk of time you want, yell stop. When that happens, everyone stops what they're doing, and then they have a set of prompts from which they can choose to fill in. You could use these or provide additional ones. And students will just fill in the blank. What I'm learning so far is, this seems important because I'm feeling confused about blank. A participant in my workshop who teaches anatomy and physiology study really liked this activity because it almost invites students to be confused about something. We know as educators that students are going to be confused at one point or another. They're learning a lot of new things. They should have questions. But a lot of times students don't like to admit they're confused. They won't speak up, or they'll contact you privately by email later on. But if they're given this prompt and they know other students are working on it and that confusion is allowed, they might be more open to letting you know what they're confused about. And then that creates an opportunity for you to clarify or for other classmates to answer the student's question and dive deeper into that discussion and that learning process. This activity is fun. It's called Welcome to Fifth Grade, or Think Like a Fifth Grader. The purpose of this activity is to help students process challenging information by paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is one of the most challenging writing skills because it requires that a writer not only comprehend what they've read, but to explain it in a new way using different words and a different sentence structure. This activity, though, asks students to imagine a different audience and to have to learn information and then explain it in a new way or a more simplified way so that a reader or a different audience could understand it. The reason this activity is so effective is because if you can truly paraphrase information, you've learned that information. So you could ask students to design a mini lesson or sketch out a conversation with a fifth grader on any topic just learned in class or that they read about. And you can come up with your own prompts, but you might have students explore things like, what would a fifth grader ask about this topic? How would you answer that question in a way a fifth grader would understand it? Or explain this concept to a fifth grader. Some modifications could be to have students work in groups. Maybe groups form questions a fifth grader would ask, then they present those questions to another group, and that other group works on explaining them in a new way to show their understanding of that topic. My participants said that they could really see this working well in the courses where students have to memorize a lot of information. It's one thing to memorize a literal definition of something, and they might hold on to that definition long enough to take a test, but if they can paraphrase and write it out and explain it by using more of those sensory modes to learn, they're much more likely to retain that information for longer amounts of time. Our fifth activity is called Passing Notes in Class. This one's fun because you think about your earlier years in your education and how thrilling passing a note in class would be. So it's just sort of a silly way to engage students. It encourages students to ask questions, facilitates recall and critical thinking, and possibly even independent research skills depending on how you want to use this activity. So it works this way. You have students on a sheet of paper write down a question they'd like answered about a topic, and then they pass that note. They fold it up, they pass it. You can have students pass notes once or multiple times, and if it's multiple times, have them pass to someone new each time. You can have students write an answer to that question or read the question aloud and answer it for the class or have the class work together. One way to kind of modify this activity is to collect them all at the end and promise that maybe 1 to 3 of those questions will be on the next exam or quiz. I bet you'll find that students will ask really good questions, maybe even more challenging questions than you would put on the exam or quiz, and perhaps the class can create a study guide from this as well. Finally, this is the metaphor activity, and it comes from that same book I mentioned earlier called Engaging Ideas. The metaphor or analogy activity I highlighted in my recent Writing Across the Curriculum newsletter for October. But this type of activity asks students to look at X from the perspective of Y. These types of activities can lead to really interesting discussions when students are asked to elaborate on their metaphors or analogies. So I have some examples here. The first one, of course, relates to English, since I'm an English professor, and students could fill in the blank. They could come up with their own metaphor or choose from options you've provided. So I might say writing an essay is like putting together a puzzle. And if that's my metaphor or an extended analogy I come up with, I could write out my explanation. I could discuss it with classmates and explain why I view it like a puzzle versus growing a garden or pulling teeth or something else. This type of activity, again, could be adopted for any course. You can see some of the examples below. I like the bacterial chromosomes are like blank, while human chromosomes are like blank. So not only are students filling in the blanks for the bacterial chromosomes, they also are for the human chromosomes, and then being encouraged to explain why those things are different or how those things compare. So think about how you might adapt this activity for your own course. Thank you for watching this video and viewing these 6 Writing to Learn activities that any professor can use in any course to engage students. If you have ideas for another workshop or video you'd like to see on any type of writing topic, please contact me or leave a note in the comment section below this video. Thank you.